Have you ever stopped to think about how many times you thought you were just living another ordinary day, when in reality, something much bigger was happening in the spiritual backstage of your life? A seemingly simple day, without warning signs, without anything out of the ordinary, and yet, full of decisions, delays, encounters and missed encounters that could change everything. What you are about to discover may surprise you, because stories of deliverance almost never begin with something extraordinary. They begin exactly like this, in normality. It was a morning like any other. The alarm clock rang, the routine followed the same script as always, thoughts were occupied with common tasks, appointments, and daily problems. Nothing indicated that this day held anything different. No visible sign, no audible voice, no clear sense of danger. Just the automatic flow of life. And perhaps that's why so many people don't realize when God is acting silently, preventing something that will never happen. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever felt that something changed the course of your day without apparent explanation? Often, the greatest deliverances happen precisely when we think nothing is happening. A delay that seemed inconvenient, a last-minute change of plans, a different path chosen almost on impulse. Small details that, in our eyes, mean nothing, but which in the spiritual world represent protection, care, and divine guidance. It is at this point that testimonies of prophetic deliverances before destruction become so impactful, because they reveal a God who acts before chaos, before pain, before loss. Perhaps you are watching this video right now during an ordinary moment in your life, or perhaps you are going through difficult days, full of unanswered questions. Either way, stay with me until the end, because this story is not just about someone who was delivered, but about how God works in ways we almost never perceive at the moment they happen. There is an invisible, silent, yet extremely precise action that manifests itself just when we think everything is under control. What's most striking is that, on that day, nothing seemed out of place. The clock showed the usual time, the surroundings were familiar, and the people around suspected nothing. And that's exactly how danger hides, camouflaged in routine. How many times have you heard someone say, "If only I had arrived 5 minutes earlier," or, "If only I hadn't changed my mind at that moment"? These phrases, often uttered almost without thinking, carry stories of escape that were only understood later. There's a specific moment when it all clicks, an instant when a person realizes they escaped something much bigger than they imagined. But before that revelation, all that existed was an ordinary day. A day that could have ended completely differently. That's why this message is so necessary, especially for those who believe that God speaks, acts, and protects, even when we don't realize it. As you listen to this story, you might begin to recall similar situations in your own life. Moments when something prevented you from being in a certain place, or made you change course for no apparent reason. Don't ignore these thoughts. They may be more than simple coincidences. What you are about to discover may open your eyes to blessings you never recognized. And as this scene unfolds, something begins to become clear. The day that seemed ordinary concealed an intense spiritual reality. A reality that would only be understood later, when the truth came to light and the heart was confronted with God's grace, mercy, and care. It is precisely from this point that everything changes. And that is where this story begins to reveal itself. And as this story begins to take shape, perhaps something inside you is already being touched. Because, deep down, we all carry memories of moments that only later made sense. Situations where something stopped us, delayed us, or diverted us from a path that seemed right, but which hid a risk we never imagined. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. Sometimes, while writing, we realize we weren't alone, and your testimony might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. This space isn't just for listening to stories, but for building a community of people who recognize God's work in the details. When you comment, share your experience, or even ask a question, you help this message reach more hearts. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and continue bringing content like this to those who need to hear that care, guidance, and deliverance still exist, even in the most ordinary days. And if this video has already sparked something in you, a thought, a memory, or a reflection, consider leaving a like. This simple gesture shows that this message has value and helps the content reach further. And if you feel that this type of message resonates with your faith, your spiritual journey, or the questions you carry, Subscribing to the channel is a way of saying you want to continue walking together. Here, each video is created with the purpose of revealing what often goes unnoticed, the silent work of God before destruction occurs. When you subscribe, you strengthen this purpose and allow more stories like this to continue being told. Stay with me because from here on out the story begins to deepen. What seemed like just an ordinary day will reveal something no one expected, and what comes next may completely change the way you see the small details of your own life. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because before deliverance occurs, there is almost always a sign. And it's not a spectacular sign. It's not something that catches everyone's attention. It doesn't come with noise or a clear explanation. Most of the time, it's something so simple that we ignore it. A detail out of place. A restlessness in the heart. A thought that arises and disappears too quickly to be taken seriously. It is precisely there that many things begin to take shape behind the scenes. Perhaps you've already experienced this without realizing it. That strange feeling of not moving forward as planned. A delay that seemed inconvenient, almost irritating. A change of course made at the last second without a logical reason. The mind tries to explain it rationally, but the heart knows there was something different there. God rarely shouts. He whispers, and that whisper, when not heard, goes unnoticed as if it were just another common thought in the rush of the day. It's curious how our modern mindset has trained us to ignore these signs. We learn to value only what is concrete, visible, measurable. Everything needs immediate proof, clear logic, external confirmation. But God's actions don't follow this pattern. He moves in the invisible, in the realm of seemingly small decisions, in the detail that appears unimportant. And it is precisely there that many deliverances begin to happen. Sometimes, the sign comes as an inconvenience we can't explain. Nothing is wrong, but something inside insists it's not the right time. Other times, it arises as unexpected resistance, a door that won't open, a conversation that doesn't flow, an appointment canceled at the last minute. On the surface, all this seems like delay, frustration, a waste of time. But behind it all, a hidden truth is being built, an impact that will only be understood later. The most delicate thing is that when we ignore these signs, we don't do it out of malice. We do it out of habit. We are used to going on autopilot, to trusting only immediate logic, to accelerating when perhaps it's time to stop. And God, even so, continues trying to warn us. He speaks through people, through recurring thoughts, through circumstances beyond our control. Nothing is random when it comes to deliverance. There is a silent journey happening while life seemingly goes on as normal. A spiritual journey that doesn't appear on social media, that doesn't make headlines, that doesn't attract anyone's attention. But it is on this journey that decisions are adjusted, paths are diverted, and tragedies are avoided before they even manifest. The problem is that we only recognize this when something comes to light and reveals what was about to happen. Perhaps that's why so many testimonies of deliverance begin with phrases like, "I almost went," or "if only I had insisted." These are accounts that carry regret mixed with gratitude. Regret for not having noticed sooner, gratitude that God insisted anyway. Because even when we ignore the initial signs, He still finds ways to protect us, to intervene, to prevent destruction from happening. These subtle warnings aren't meant to scare us, but to align us. They invite us to slow down, to listen more, to realize that not every open door should be crossed. There is wisdom in retreating, there is faith in waiting, there is obedience in changing course without understanding everything. This understanding changes the way we see life, decisions, and even the delays that bother us so much. When we begin to look back, many things take on a new meaning. What seemed like loss reveals itself as protection. What seemed like confusion shows itself as direction. And what seemed like just an ordinary day begins to carry an enormous spiritual weight. It is at this point that transformation begins, because the person stops living merely reacting to events and begins to perceive that there is constant care, even when everything seems silent. But this realization doesn't come all at once. It builds up little by little as revelations emerge. And when we finally understand what was avoided, the heart is confronted, not only by the danger that came close, but by the awareness that God was there all along, trying to warn, trying to protect, trying to guide. It's impossible to go through this understanding and remain the same. Something changes inside. And it is precisely at this moment that the story takes on even greater weight, because the deliverance ceases to be merely an escape and becomes a calling, an invitation to reflection, to a change of mindset, to a review of choices. What seemed like just a detail transforms into a watershed moment. And it is from this revelation that everything begins to make sense in a deeper way. Now, before moving on, write a simple sentence in the comments if this resonated with you. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a point in this story that completely changes how everything is understood. Up to this point, we've talked about signs, premonitions, subtle warnings that almost always go unnoticed. But there comes a moment when deliverance ceases to be merely an invisible possibility and becomes a concrete fact, even if the person doesn't yet know it. It's the instant when something serious happens exactly where they should be, at the exact time they should have arrived, just as everything was planned. And yet, they weren't there. While life continued at a different pace, while that person dealt with simple, common, almost banal things, a tragedy unfolded silently in a place that was part of their original plan. An unexpected accident, a violent situation, an irreversible loss, something that left deep scars on those present. But not on her. Not because she was smarter, stronger, or better prepared. Simply because, for reasons that are only now beginning to make sense, she was diverted from her path. What's most impressive about this kind of invisible deliverance is that it happens without fanfare. There's no immediate awareness of the danger avoided. There's no feeling of victory, no relief, no gratitude at that moment. The person goes about their day thinking everything went normally. They might even complain about the delay, the change of plans, the frustration of not having done what they wanted, without imagining that, at that very instant, a completely different reality was forming in parallel. This is where the idea of behind the scenes gains strength. Because while our eyes only see the surface, there is an invisible movement happening. A spiritual mechanism being adjusted, decisions being redirected, trajectories being altered. And all this happens without asking permission, without prior explanation, without formal warning. It just happens. And the impact of this will only be perceived later, when the hidden truth comes to light. In many accounts, this moment arrives abruptly. An unexpected phone call, a piece of news that paralyzes, a casual comment from someone who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And suddenly, the person realizes they should have been there, that it was part of the original plan, that if nothing had changed, the outcome could have been completely different. It is in that second that the body reacts even before the mind. A chill in the stomach, a heavy silence, a persistent thought that won't leave the head. I almost went. This realization has a profound impact because it's not just about imagining an alternative scenario. It's about understanding that existence itself was at risk without any awareness of it. And this challenges the control mentality that many people carry. The idea that everything depends solely on our choices, our attention, our ability to foresee risks. Suddenly, it becomes clear that there are limits to what we can see and anticipate. The invisible deliverance reveals an uncomfortable yet transformative truth. We are not always in control, but that doesn't mean we are unprotected. There is a shield that operates beyond our perception, a protection that doesn't require prior understanding to function. Simply acts. And when this reality imposes itself, something within the person begins to change. The way they look at the past, at the decisions made, at the details that seemed insignificant. Often, the person begins to mentally revisit the day in question. They remember being late, the conversation that made them change their mind, the alternative route chosen almost without thinking. What previously seemed random begins to take on a different meaning. The pieces slowly begin to fit together, and each piece brings with it a mixture of astonishment, gratitude, and fear. Astonishment at realizing how close you were to danger. Gratitude for not having been there. Fear at recognizing that something much bigger was at work. This process doesn't happen quickly. It unfolds like an internal, silent, profound journey. The person begins to realize that their story could have ended there, at that point they never experienced. And this generates a real transformation, not a superficial, momentary change, but something that shakes the structure of faith, mentality, and the way of facing life. After such a deliverance, no one ever goes back to being exactly the same as before. What's most striking is that this kind of deliverance isn't accompanied by applause or public recognition. Often, no one around understands the magnitude of what was avoided. To others, the person simply wasn't present. They just arrived later. They simply changed their mind. But inside, something was profoundly touched. A new awareness begins to form. The notion that life isn't just a sequence of random events, but a tapestry full of silent interventions. This understanding also raises difficult questions. How many times has this happened before? How many similar situations have gone unnoticed along the way? How many dangers have been avoided without us ever knowing? These questions are not meant to generate fear, but to awaken reverence. To remind us that there is constant care, even when we are not paying attention, even when we are distracted, even when we don't notice anything different. And as these revelations deepen, the story begins to take on even greater emotional weight, because the deliverance ceases to be just an isolated event and becomes part of a pattern of protection, of redirection, of intervention in the most critical moments. And it is precisely when this realization begins to sink in that the heart is prepared for something even more intense, something that goes beyond the initial shock and touches the conscience directly. It is at this point that the narrative shifts in tone, because we are no longer just talking about the danger that was avoided, but about the effect this had on the soul of those who lived through it all without knowing. From here, what was hidden begins to be revealed more clearly, and the reaction that arises is not merely rational. It is emotional, spiritual, profound. And it is precisely this reaction that begins to take shape now, silently, as understanding matures and the truth draws near. If this resonates with you, write a simple sentence in the comments. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a moment in this story where everything breaks down from the inside. Up until now, the deliverance was invisible, silent, almost abstract. Something that happened unnoticed, without leaving immediate marks. But there comes a moment when the truth comes to light, and when it appears, it doesn't come gently. It arrives as a direct impact to the heart, dismantling any attempt to rationalize what happened. The revelation almost never comes at the right time, in the right place, or in the way we imagine. Sometimes it arises in a casual conversation, one of those that doesn't promise much. Other times, it comes through unexpected news, a side note, a casual comment that suddenly changes the atmosphere completely. It's in that second that something inside the person freezes, because they begin to realize that it's not just a distant story. It has to do with them, with the place where they should be, with the time they had planned, with the decision that was changed without clear explanation. The mind tries to keep up, but the heart arrives first. Each detail revealed weighs more than the last. What happened there was no small thing. It wasn't simple. People were hurt. Lives were scarred. The scene was one of chaos, pain, and loss. And while all this was being recounted, a silent question echoed inside. What if I had gone? This question doesn't come as a complete sentence. It comes like a punch to the chest, like a sudden emptiness, like a heavy silence that takes over everything. At that moment, the person begins to mentally retrace their day. They go back behind the scenes to the decisions that seemed irrelevant, the delay that irritated them, the change of route that seemed inconvenient, the strange feeling that was ignored. Each detail takes on an unbearable weight, because now it's clear, that wasn't chance. That was intervention. It was care. It was deliverance. And this understanding brings not only relief, it brings confrontation. The hidden truth begins to fully reveal itself. What God prevented was not something abstract, it was something real, concrete, devastating. And the more details emerge, the harder it becomes to maintain the image of an ordinary day. The heart begins to understand what the mind is still trying to organize. There is a huge difference between knowing you have been delivered and understanding what you have been delivered from. When this understanding arrives, it dismantles any posture of indifference. Many describe this moment as if the ground disappeared beneath their feet for a few seconds. Legs weaken, breathing changes, gaze becomes lost. It's not drama, it's awareness. It's the weight of realizing that one's own story has almost taken an irreversible turn. And this has a profound impact on one's mindset. Life ceases to be merely a sequence of days and begins to be seen as a journey surrounded by care, purpose, and interventions that can no longer be ignored. The hardest part isn't accepting that God acted. The hardest part is accepting that He acted even when He wasn't heard, even when the signs were ignored, even when the person continued on distracted, not noticing anything. This breaks pride, breaks self-sufficiency, breaks the idea that everything is under control. And that's exactly why this moment hurts. Because it reveals how fragile we are and, at the same time, how much we are cared for. The revelation also brings a kind of silent regret, not necessarily for a specific mistake, but for an attitude, for having ignored warnings, for having treated as coincidence what was direction, for having accelerated when perhaps it was time to listen more. This regret doesn't come burdened with guilt, but with awareness. An awareness that transforms, that repositions, that changes the way of facing future decisions. At this point in the journey, something begins to reorganize itself internally. Values are reevaluated, priorities change, spiritual sensitivity increases. The person begins to realize that not everything needs a logical explanation to be real, that not all protection makes noise, that not every deliverance comes with an immediate feeling of gratitude. Some only reveal themselves later, when the truth appears and breaks the heart to rebuild it in a deeper way. This revelation is not the end of the story. On the contrary, it is a watershed moment. It is the moment when deliverance ceases to be merely a past event and begins to generate consequences in the present. From here on, the reaction will not only be emotional. It will be practical, visible, transformative. Something begins to emerge from this silent breaking, something that will still manifest itself clearly. But before all of this is fully revealed, this question lingers in the air, heavy, sincere, impossible to ignore. How many more times did the truth need to come to light for the heart to finally understand? If this part resonated with you, write in the comments, "This moved me." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a point where revelation ceases to be mere understanding and transforms into reaction. It's no longer just the mind trying to process what happened. It's the entire body responding to the weight of the truth. When he finally understood what God had prevented that day, there was no speech, no attempt to appear strong, no rational explanation to support what was happening inside. His legs gave way. The ground became too small to contain everything that was surfacing. And it was there, in that silent instant, that he fell to his knees. It wasn't a rehearsed gesture, nor an automatic religious act. It was a raw, inevitable human response. The tears came uncontrollably, not as someone asking for something, but as someone acknowledging something. Acknowledging that he was on the verge of something irreversible. He acknowledges that he didn't see the signs. He acknowledges that he remained distracted, too confident in himself, while a hidden truth unfolded behind the scenes. And, above all, he acknowledges that he was still spared. This kind of breaking down doesn't stem from fear, it stems from awareness. It's when a person understands that they didn't escape through merit, intelligence, or preparation, but through grace. A grace that didn't require prior explanation, perfect behavior, or total attention. They simply acted. And when that realization hits, something inside falls apart. Pride loses its power. Haste loses its meaning. Self-sufficiency begins to crumble. There, on his knees, he wept not only for the danger he had avoided, but for the attitude he had carried until then. For his rushed mentality. For the decisions made without inner consultation. For the way he treated warnings as coincidences and deviations as inconveniences. The regret that arises at that moment is not heavy, it is not destructive. It is profound, cleanses, it reorganizes. It's as if something were realigned inside, bringing a clarity that did not exist before. The recognition of divine grace was not accompanied by euphoria, but by silence. A silence laden with meaning. A silence in which one realizes that life could have taken a different course, and that this other course would have been irreversible. It is impossible to live through such a moment and continue facing each day in the same way. The journey changes. The way of deciding changes. Sensitivity changes. Because now there is awareness. This type of experience generates a transformation that goes beyond the emotion of the moment. It affects how a person perceives time, choices, and even the small details of daily life. What once seemed trivial begins to carry weight. A delay is no longer just a delay. A change of plans is no longer just frustration. There is always the silent question, is this protecting me from something I don't yet see? It is at this point that faith ceases to be merely a concept and becomes lived experience. Not a noisy faith, full of words, but a practical, silent, attentive faith. A faith that learns to listen more and run less. That learns to respect the limits of its own understanding. That understands that not everything needs to be explained to be accepted. This change of mindset doesn't happen all at once, but begins there on that ground, in that weeping, in that humble recognition that life is too fragile to be lived without discernment. The deliverance, then, ceases to be merely a significant episode from the past and becomes a milestone in the journey. A watershed moment. Before, decisions were made based solely on logic and urgency. Afterward, they are filtered through more sensitive listening, greater attention to what's happening behind the scenes, and greater respect for the signs. Not because the person began to live in fear, but because they began to live with awareness. And this awareness generates something very powerful: constant gratitude. Not the kind of gratitude that only appears in extreme moments, but a gratitude that accompanies ordinary days. Waking up takes on a different meaning. Returning home becomes a privilege. Small routines gain a new value. The person understands that being here, now, breathing, continuing the journey, is not something guaranteed. It is the result of care that will often never be fully understood. At the same time, a sense of spiritual responsibility is born. Not in the sense of burden, but of purpose. The question ceases to be simply, "Why was I delivered?" and begins to transform into, "How will I live from now on?" This question doesn't need an immediate answer, but it resonates. It guides. It shapes future choices. Because those who experience such a deliverance can no longer live on autopilot. This brokenness also brings people closer. It brings us closer to God, but also to other people. There is more empathy, more patience, more understanding. Because when someone understands how much their own life hung by a thread, they begin to look at others with more humanity. The transformation is not only spiritual, it is relational. It affects the way we speak, listen, and react. And yet, this is not the end of the story, because after the fall, after the tears, after the recognition, something begins to be built. A new understanding, a new stance, a new way of walking. What happened that day didn't remain confined to the past. It continues to produce effects, and it is precisely these effects, silent and profound, that begin to manifest from here, leading the story to an even more intense place. If this resonates with you, write a simple sentence in the comments. "This transformed me from the inside." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this testimony doesn't exist merely to be heard. It exists to be applied. Nothing revealed so far points only to someone's past story. There's a living prophetic message running through all of this, reaching exactly whoever is listening now, at the point in their journey where they find themselves. Because the truth is that many deliverances don't happen after destruction. They happen before. And that's precisely why they go unnoticed. Perhaps you're going through a phase where nothing seems extraordinary. Ordinary days, routine decisions, choices that seem too small to carry any spiritual weight. But it's precisely in these moments that much is being defined behind the scenes. There's a silent movement happening while you go about your life, solve problems, make plans, face challenges. Not everything that held you back was a waste of time. Not everything that frustrated you was by chance. Not everything that went wrong was truly wrong. The prophetic message here is not meant to generate fear, but to awaken awareness, to align the mindset, to remind you that there is a constant care at work even when you don't realize it. How many times have you arrived late somewhere and been irritated, without knowing that that lateness saved you from something bigger? How many decisions have you changed at the last minute and then never thought about again? How many times has the restlessness in your heart been ignored because it seemed exaggerated or illogical? There is a hidden truth in many of these experiences. God doesn't only act when everything falls apart. He acts beforehand. He protects beforehand. He averts beforehand. But often, human beings only recognize deliverance when destruction becomes visible to someone. And when that happens, the inevitable question arises: what if I had insisted? What if I hadn't changed my mind? What if I had completely ignored that sign? This reflection is not meant to paralyze, but to mature. It marks a turning point in the spiritual journey. Because from this understanding, the person begins to live more attentively, more sensitively, more consciously. Not in the sense of paranoia, but of discernment. Life ceases to be merely a sequence of reactions and becomes a path observed with more care. Decisions begin to be filtered not only by haste, but by peace. Not only by logic, but by direction. This is one of the most profound transformations that such a testimony can generate. It changes how you interpret the past and how you position yourself in the present. Old situations begin to take on a different meaning. That no you received, that door that closed, that opportunity that didn't happen. Everything begins to be reviewed under a new lens. And often, what seemed like frustration was protection. What seemed like loss was deliverance. What seemed like silence was care. The prophetic message also carries a subtle call. An invitation to personal reflection. Not to point out mistakes, but to awaken gratitude. To recognize that you have arrived here not only through your own strength, but through interventions that were never announced. Things that you will only fully understand in eternity. But some are beginning to be revealed now as consciousness opens. And perhaps, as you listen to all this, memories are surfacing. Specific situations, details you never connected, coincidences that now seem to carry a different weight. Don't ignore them. These memories are part of the process of revelation. They help build a stronger, less naive, more mature faith. A faith that doesn't depend solely on visible miracles, but recognizes the invisible workings. There is purpose even in detours. There is direction even in delays. There is love even in frustrations we don't understand at the time. This message isn't about living looking back with regret, but about moving forward with more awareness. About understanding that the journey isn't random. That there's a guiding hand even when the path seems confusing. And when that realization sets in, something changes in how you view the future. Fear loses ground. Anxiety diminishes. Not because everything has become easy, but because you understand that you don't walk alone. That there is care behind the scenes. That not every danger needs to be seen to be avoided. That not every battle needs to be fought to be won. That's the authority of this message. It doesn't come from imposition, but from experience. It doesn't come from discourse, but from impact. Because whoever has realized they were saved before destruction never lives the same way again. They start listening more, respecting the signs, honoring the deviations, trusting even when you don't understand everything. And as this awareness deepens, new revelations begin to emerge. Not all at once, but in due time. Some will confront, others will comfort, others will guide important decisions that haven't even been made yet. Because God's work wasn't confined to that day. He continues to manifest himself, adjusting routes, preparing paths. This message continues to unfold because there are still layers to be revealed, understandings to mature, and applications to reach deeper areas of life. But it all begins here, with this question silently echoing within you. How many times has God already saved you and you haven't even realized it? If this reflection resonated with you, write in the comments, I recognize the blessings. And if you've made it this far, it's because something in this message resonated with you. It wasn't just a story. It was an invitation to reflection, to awareness, to seeing the behind-the-scenes aspects of your own journey with greater sensitivity. If this content helped you, brought you clarity, or made you realize blessings you previously missed, consider subscribing to the channel. That way, you can continue walking with me through messages that deepen this perspective and strengthen this more conscious way of living your faith in everyday life. If you want, also leave a comment saying that you made it to the end. You can write something simple, like, this message was for me, or, I'm with you until the end. This helps create this space for exchange, where we realize that we are not alone on this journey. And if throughout the video you felt a connection, if something really made sense, the like is just a silent way of saying that, of reinforcing that this type of content has value and deserves to continue reaching more people. And before you leave, there's a video here that perfectly complements this topic. Click and continue with me there, because this journey of understanding and sensitivity still has much to reveal.